Boker Tov. Today's Amud is Daf Chet Amud Bet. We're at the very, very top of Daf Chet Amud Bet. So just to recap very, very briefly, we had on Daf Gimel Amud Bet, we asked the question. We had a special drasha. We have a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Veisha elachota lo tikach litzror legalot ervata aleha bechaya." This pasuk everybody should memorize already. It says it's talking about the isur of marrying one's one's wife's sister, his sister-in-law, his wife's sister. So the pasuk Boker Tov. So the pasuk teaches that one's not allowed to marry his wife's sister, and it says in it the word aleha. The Gemara said, what's the deal with the word aleha? That's an additional random word. So the Gemara explained, no, aleha is coming to teach me that this pasuk is talking about a situation of aleha, a situation of yibum, and even so, you don't take your wife's sister, even if it's a situation where there's a mitzvah of yibum. The Gemara asked the question, why do I need this drasha? I already know, obviously, mitzvah aseh of yibum is not going to override something which is an isur karet. That's something I know already. So why do I need this special drasha to come and teach me don't do yibum on the wife's sister? So we yesterday saw three answers. One answer is, no, I only need this pasuk in a specific case where I would have thought to apply the principle of ho'il ve'ishtari ishtari. Once this woman became mutar, that one isur was lifted, and she had a time where she was mutar to me, and then she became my sister-in-law, so that isur won't stop the mitzvah of yibum. That's one understanding of why we need this drasha. Second understanding was I would have thought to maybe learn from the Hekesh or Rabbeinu Yonah from Eshet Ach, that just like by Eshet Ach, there is a heter, the erva, the isur erva is lifted in order to perform the mitzvah of yibum. So I would have thought to learn all the arayot from Eshet Ach, from the brother's wife, that just like there's a heter of yibum by the brother's wife, the isur is lifted, so too by all the other arayot, the isur is lifted. We said no, we don't do that. And the final limud we learned was what the Gemara is in right now, that actually, really, you don't need a drasha to tell me that yibum is not allowed by the wife's sister. What's the whole purpose of the drasha? The whole purpose of the drasha is to teach me that the tzara, the co-wife of the erva, is muteret when it's not a scenario of yibum. Meaning, the pasuk is teaching me, Isha lachota lo tikach litzor legalot ervata alea bechaya. You can't take the wife and the wife's sister and her co-wife in a situation of yibum. But if it's not a situation of yibum, the erva's co-wife is muteret. The wife, your sister-in-law's co-wife, your sister-in-law is married to somebody, and there's another woman that's also her co-wife. They're both married to the same man. So if that guy dies, you're allowed to take your sister-in-law's co-wife. That's the whole pasuk. So the Gemara asks a question, which seems like a silly question, but if you think about it, in the structure of the limud that we have, it's actually a very, very solid question. And the Gemara rolls with it and tries to figure out an answer. Listen to this question. Where it says, Amar le Rami bar Chama, third line, Chet Amud Bet. Amar le Rami bar Chama le Rava. Rami bar Chama says to Rava, Ema erva gufe shelo bimkom mitzvah tishtari. Why don't we say that when it's not a situation of yibum, the sister-in-law herself is muteret? Meaning, the Torah revealed to us there's an isur of taking one's sister-in-law, right? Your wife's sister. So we explained right now, according to Rava, that this whole thing, it's really a drasha that we're learning from the word aleha, that the pasuk is talking about a scenario of yibum. And it's coming to tell me that in a scenario of yibum, the co-wife is muteret. I'm sorry, the co-wife is asura, but in not a scenario of yibum, there's no isur. So the structure of the drasha is telling me that this pasuk is talking about a situation of yibum. If that's the case, when there's no situation of yibum, it should be allowed for one to marry his wife's sister. Meaning the whole Isur is being presented in a scenario of Yibum. We're learning this word Aleha is coming to teach me that this Isur is applicable in a scenario of Yibum, and when there's no scenario of Yibum, this Isur is not applicable, and you could be with a co-wife of the Erva. So why don't we learn that the whole Isur of the Erva, the whole Isur of wife's sister, is only in a scenario of Yibum? That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara tries to get out of it very easily, but the Gemara says not so fast. We're going to see. So just to reiterate, the question of the Gemara, very simply, is how do you know that when it's not a situation of Yibum, there's an Isur of marrying a sister-in-law?
Torah says that.
The Torah is the way we're structuring the drasha, that pasuk is talking about a scenario of Yibum. When it says Isha lachota lo tikach litzror, so he said, okay, you can't be with a woman and her sister. You can't be with your wife's sister, litzror, and the co-wife. But we said that Isur is only aleha. It's only in the framework of Yibum. Because we're saying the co-wife...
There are other pasukim in the Torah that say, no?
This is the Makor. This is the pasuk of wife's sister. So it's a crazy idea, but the Gemara is asking it, and in the framework of this drasha, it's a very solid question. If you're telling me this pasuk is only talking about a scenario of Yibum, so then the sister-in-law should be muteret when it's not a Yibum case. So the Gemara says, one second, I have a kal v'chomer. V'lav kal v'chomer, isn't it a kal v'chomer? Bimkom mitzvah asira. When there's a mitzvah of Yibum, the sister-in-law is asura. Shelo bimkom mitzvah sharia. You want to tell me when there's no mitzvah of Yibum, you could marry the sister-in-law? Meaning we're saying even in a scenario of Yibum, you can't take, when there's a mitzvah, you can't take the sister-in-law. So for sure, a person can't be with his sister-in-law when there's no mitzvah of Yibum. The Gemara says that's not a good kal v'chomer at all. Why? Because I'll find you somebody who, in a scenario of Yibum, is not allowed, but when there's no scenario of Yibum, they are allowed. That'll destroy the kal v'chomer. What's the whole kal v'chomer? Oh, if there's a mitzvah to take her, and you're not allowed to be with her, for sure when there's no mitzvah, you're not allowed to be with her. But the Gemara says, I'm going to prove to you that's not a solid line of thinking. Why? So Amar le tzara tochiach. The co-wife is going to be a disproof to your line of reasoning. Debimkom mitzvah asira. When there's a mitzvah of Yibum, you're not allowed to be with the co-wife of the sister-in-law. V'shelo bimkom mitzvah sharia. But when it's not a scenario of Yibum, when it's some random guy who married someone's sister-in-law and also she has a co-wife, you're allowed to take the co-wife. So if you're allowed to take the co-wife, because we're saying the pasuk that says a co-wife is asur is only in the framework of Yibum, so it's the same pasuk. The pasuk says that says that sister-in-law is asura is also only in the framework of Yibum. So we're stuck with this question. It's a funny question, but like the Gemara is really going with it. How do you know what's your makor that you're not allowed to be with your sister-in-law when it's not a Yibum case? You're telling me the whole pasuk is talking about Yibum. So Amar le, so he said, no, you know why? Alecha Amar Kra Bechayeha. The pasuk says Bechayeha. We learn from that word. Again, the pasuk is, this pasuk should be coming out of your ears, your mouth, your nose. You should know it by heart. Veisha el achota lo tikach litzuror legalot ervata aleha bechayeha. So the word bechayeha in that pasuk teaches me kol shebechayeha. As long as your wife is alive, you can't be with her sister. Meaning, even if it's a case of Yibum, not a case of Yibum, doesn't matter. As long as she's alive, you have to be with you can't take her sister. So the Gemara says, no, that word is not teaching me that it's even outside of the framework of Yibum there's an Isser. That word is teaching me something else. Hi, bechayeha mibayle. I need that word bechayeha lemeute leachar mita to exclude that after mita, after the wife dies, he is allowed to be with the sister-in-law to do Yibum. So it's still all within the framework of Yibum, but it's coming to teach me that you can't be with the wife's sister as long as she's alive in a framework of Yibum. So if the wife dies, then you could do Yibum to her sister. But I still don't have a source that this Isur applies outside of the framework of Yibum. So the Gemara says, Hahi mi ve'isha lachota nafka. The Gemara says, no. That which after the wife is dead, he's allowed to do Yibum to her sister, that I learned from the words Isha el achota. And what we're trying to say is to his wife's sister. Right? If his wife dies, he'll be able to do Yibum to the sister. That we learn from the part of the Pasuk says Ve'isha el achota. So the Gemara says, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to say if we learn that from Isha el achota, then the word Bechayeha is available. And if the word Bechayeha is available, I could learn that Bechayeha is telling me that even outside of a framework of Yibum, as long as the wife is alive, there's going to be an Isur to be with her sister. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. If I would have just learned from Isha elachota that you can't have the two sisters together, so I would have learned that, okay, but if you divorce one, you could do Yibum to the other one, and that's not true. Therefore, Talmud Lomar Bechayeha, as long as, even if a person divorced his wife, he is not allowed to do Yibum to the sister because the wife is still alive. So the word Bechayeha, we still need to teach me something that is in the framework of Yibum. Therefore, we still do not have a Mekor, we don't have a source that outside of the framework of Yibum, there's an Isur to marry one sister-in-law. So we're back to our original question. What's with why? How do we know that there's an isur of being with one's sister-in-law, being with one's wife's sister outside of the framework of Yibum? The whole Mekor that we have, we say this pasuk is talking about Yibum. So Ella Amar Rav Huna bar Tachlifa Mishmei de Rava Trei Krai Ktivi. So Rav Huna bar Tachlifa says in the name of Rava, we have two parts of a pasuk here, and we're going to make two drashot. Very, very interesting way of learning the pasuk. Ktiv Isha elachota lo tikach litzror. One part of the pasuk says Isha elachota, a woman and her sister, lo tikach litzror. From the word litzror, we learn even the co-wives are included. So from that word, we learn that there's an isur on the erva, on the sister-in-law, and also on her co-wife. Legalot ervata, it says to reveal her erva, that's singular. So from that part of the pasuk, we learn that there's an isur on one person. So the Gemara's, what he's doing is he's trying to set up a limud over here. One part of the pasuk is teaching me that there's two women that are asur. The woman, the sister-in-law, and her co-wife. Another part of the pasuk is teaching me that there's one woman who's asur, ervata, the sister-in-law, not the co-wife. So we have two different diukim from the same pasuk. On the one hand, one part of the pasuk is indicating that the sister-in-law is asura and her co-wife is asura. And on the other hand, the other part of the pasuk is explaining that just the sister-in-law is asura. Dechada mashma. It sounds like only one woman, only the sister-in-law, not the co-wife. So, Kate said, how is this going to work out? So everybody understand the dynamic over here? One pasuk is indicating there's an isur on the sister-in-law and her co-wife. The other pasuk is indicating that there's only an isur on the sister-in-law. So Kate said, how is it going to work out? So you have to come to the conclusion that bimkom mitzvah, in a scenario of yibum, shtehen asurot. They're both the woman and her co-wife are going to be asurot. Shelo bimkom mitzvah, when it's not a scenario of yibum, so that's when there's only one that's asur. Hi asura v'tzarata muteret. So that's what Rav Huna wants to suggest. So Rav Huna is saying, you know how we know there's an isur outside of Yibum? Because one part of the pasuk indicates that two women are asur. One part of the pasuk indicates that one of them is asur. So in the scenario of yibum, both the sister-in-law and her co-wife are asur, and then outside of a scenario of yibum, the sister-in-law is asur, but the co-wife is not asura. So if some random guy was married to his sister-in-law and had another wife as well, and he dies, then the sister-in-law would be asura, but the co-wife would not be asura. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, great. So we see that there's an isur not in a scenario of yibum as well. But how do you know that? Meaning we have two parts of the pasuk, right? Again, one part is saying the sister-in-law and the co-wife are asurot. One part is saying just the sister-in-law is asura. So we said, okay, one of them is talking when they're both asura, that's a case of yibum. When just the sister-in-law, that's not a case of yibum. The Gemara suggests now, well, maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe in a scenario of yibum where there's a mitzvah, only the sister-in-law is not allowed. And when there's no mitzvah, when there's no yibum, the sister-in-law and the co-wife should not be allowed. The Gemara is suggesting to flip it. So says the Gemara as follows. Says the Gemara, Eipuch ana, I'll flip it around and I'll tell you like this, that bimkom mitzvah hi asura v'tzarata muteret. In a scenario of yibum, meaning the Gemara is making a suggestion. Why don't we say that we learn from here that in a scenario of yibum, that's when she would be asura and the co-wife would be muteret because there's a mitzvah. And shelo bimkom mitzvah shtein asurot. When it's not a scenario of yibum, both of them would be asurot. So the Gemara says, no, you can't learn that way. You can lo yomar aleha. If that's the case, I don't need the drasha from the word aleha. The word aleha would not be teaching me anything because even without the word aleha, I would have come to this conclusion. Just having two parts of the pasuk, one part telling me two women are asur, one part telling me one woman is asur. Without the word aleha, I would have come to this conclusion. Aleha is coming to teach me that a chidush in yibum, therefore we come to learn that the erva is poter her tzar. Her tzara also there would be asura even in a scenario of yibum. So Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana, mimai dehaya alea li yisura, dilma lehetera. So Rav Ashi wants to suggest also a wild suggestion. Maybe the word aleha is coming to be matir the erva. Now he's going to explain himself. V'hachika amar rachmana. This is what the Torah means to say. Isha elachota lo tikach litzuror. You can't take like lo hiv lo tzarata. You can't take a woman or her co-wife, their sister-in-law or her co-wife. Shelo bimkom aleha. That's when it's not in a scenario of yibum. Aval bimkom aleha, but in a scenario of yibum, shtein mutarot. You could marry both of them. Meaning maybe that's what the pasuk is coming to tell me. So the Gemara says, no, that can't be. That obviously can't be. Imken legalot erva dechada, the part of the pasuk that seemed to indicate that there's just the sister-in-law is asura and not the co-wife. Hechi mishkachat la. What case is that going to be talking about? Ibim mitzvah. If it's a scenario of yibum, you just told me you wanted to suggest that shtein mutarot, they would both be allowed. And ishlo bimkom mitzvah shtein asurot. If it's not bimkom mitzvah, they're both asurot. Okay, so ad kan, we just clarified that drasha. So we're coming out. This is really the end of the first whole sugya. This is where we finally conclude the first sugya. So we started with the question, just to recap, we started with the question, what do we need a drasha for? Obviously, you're not allowed to, yibum does not override an isur karet of erva. So the Gemara said that we need a drasha. We learned from either because I would have thought hoel v'ishtari in a specific case, or because I would have thought to learn from the Hekesh of Rabbi Yonah, or this last answer of Rava, that the pasuk of Aleha is not really coming to teach me that the sister-in-law is asura. I already would have known that. The pasuk of Aleha is coming to teach me that when it's not a scenario of yibum, the whole Braita on Daf Gimel Amud is coming to teach me when it's not a scenario of yibum, the co-wife is muteret. Okay, so let's, which also concludes the sugi of aseh dochalot aseh. Let's go a little bit further. Then maybe we'll share some ideas on this sugi of.
Pilegesh
Yes.
is a wife.
Pilegesh, no. It's not the same as a wife. There's a machloket, Rambam and Rashi, exactly what would Pilegesh. Is it Kiddushin? Is there no Kiddushin? Ketubah without Kiddushin? Kiddushin without Ketubah? But that's...
the kids come from the Pilegesh.
Children come from Pilegesh. It counts as Pirya Verivia. They're kosher kids.
Yeah.
It's just... the Rambam says the difference is Pilegesh doesn't have a... I don't remember which way the Rambam says. Either there's no Ketubah and no Kiddushin, or there is Kiddushin but there's no Ketubah. Okay, but let's go further. So Gufa. Let's try to get to the bottom of the Amud. This Gemara is not as hard. Gufa. Rebbe Omer. Velakach ulkacha v'ibem v'ibma. So we quoted this. We had this on the previous Amud. Velakach ulkacha v'ibem v'ibma. Le'esor tzarot v'arayot. Rebbe learns from this pasuk that the co-wives and the arayot are not taken from Yibum. For Yibum. So the Gemara says midi or really we said le'esor tzarot shel arayot. Midi tzarot ktiva. So Gemara asks question number 1. This drasha, you said, okay, velakach ulkacha. He marries her, not the other girl. You're excluding somebody. Where do you see anything about a tzara? Where do you see anything about a co-wife? So question number 1, midi tzarot ktiva hacha. Is there anything written about co-wives here? How you get co-wife from this pasuk? V'od tzarot militzror nafka. Also, we learned tzarot. We learned the iser